folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin, eclectic album reviews and general musical meanderings. It's always been my goal to use this channel to help bring people together through music, kind of like in the way you used to, go to each other's dorm rooms or living rooms and sit down and just talk about music that you're listening to. So that goal of this particular project finally came to fruition yesterday evening when I had my first ever Viewers' Choice Roundup chat, talking about the top 20 that they generated over the course of last year. And I'm really excited about the end result. I think we had a lot of really good discussions about the music and then kind of went off on tangents about other aspects of music that just kind of happened naturally as part of the conversation. So as a result, this next post is kind of long. It probably should be treated more like a podcast. I kind of have to let go of my usual news format that I normally do, and it's a little bit more of the usual Zoom split screen thing. But those of my viewership who's really interested in music and musical topics, I think you'll find a lot of interest here to follow along with. I really want to thank Kyle and Barbara and Brent and Kenny and my mom, for that matter, for all coming on and contributing to the conversation. And I hope that you enjoyed listening to our conversation as much as we enjoyed having it. I think my other two folks I mentioned around here, my friend Brent, a.k.a. Snoopy. Can you hear us, bro?
Mic check.
Mic check on.
All right, good. Sorry, I had to go through the browser. Something's going on with the app. So
right on. And then I see the shadow of my friend Kenny McLaughlin over there. I don't know if you can hear us or not. Kenny, Kenny was the guitar player for my garage band in high school.
Nice.
I remember Kenny.
Yeah, say again?
I said I remember Kenny.
Yeah. So we've recently reconnected, and I know Kenny's a guy with a strong musical opinion, so I appreciate having him around for sure. Cool. All right, so just so we we're on the same wavelength of what I want to do for this evening. I've been keeping this blog thing for a few years, and I've always kind of had the top 20 thing in the background. And so for the last couple of years, thanks to Brent, Snoopy, I've been sort of working on getting this process down in a way that I could do it in a more public setting, right? And it's really tricky because you're talking about taking a real subjective experience, the subjective experience of music, and flattening it into something very empirical, right? Something very yes, no, black, white, objective. And it's difficult to get to the end of the whole thing and have something that really feels like it was representative of a broad variety of people's music, right? Of course, my whole argument is I've got like 126 albums that most people have not heard before, right? And part of this is just getting more exposure for stuff and getting more people to hear stuff. And at the end of the day, how do you represent that with a variety of people? Right. So for 2 years, I think Brent was my guinea pig on this, was like trying to do the showdown process and come up with a variety of ways to make it work. And so this is the first year I think I really put it out in a more public setting. Barbara stuck with us the whole year on this, and I had several other people come on during the showdown. So my first question is, knowing what you know about the final top 20 setting, I wanted to get your opinions on how effective you think it was as representing your interest as far as the end result.
Well, I'll start since I kind of did it the whole way through. I think it was pretty effective. I mean, I found that a lot of my favorites from the entire year ended up in the top 20. Mm-hmm. And there were times when I wasn't sure if that was going to happen because of the way they were rated or the way that, they moved through the cycle, or, the way that you brought, spring back into the fall and kind of had those two competing against each other. I thought it was a really interesting, fun process to go through. But yeah, I love what ended up in the top 20. Absolutely. I love so many others, as you know. So it was just fantastic to just get so much more music, cycling through my Spotify.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The trick is, for me, is getting it, and cycling is the key word, because especially you probably are all like me, as you get older, it gets harder to attach yourself to new music, to be open to it. And very often, like the first time I listen to something, it's like, this is gibberish. I'm in the process right now of listening to a lot of new music because it's the new year, and I'm like, I'm just not going to like anything at first. I know I'm not. Just get this first listening out of the way, and let's go forward. So there's this thing where you listen to it, and then you kind of bring it back, and then you kind of bring it back. And there's a sort of like weird things that happen in my subconscious to where like it sounds completely different the second or third time I listen to it. So I want to give myself a chance to let the music kind of get in there, especially the ones, your favorite albums are the ones that really do sound like gibberish at first, almost always.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I went back and revisited all 20 in preparation for this call. I'm pretty satisfied overall with our collective picks, what floated to the top. And in some cases the video, like if you just clicked on the YouTube link for the one tune, some of those samples, I did deeper dives in Spotify, and some of those samples just don't reflect the full sound of the album, and it's hard, right? Because some of those albums are so diverse in sound. So I'd encourage people to hit the whole album with Bandcamp, Spotify, but like Wolfpack is an example that came to mind. I mean, it's just how do you take one song and make it representative?
Right. One of the things that I think makes, because my list and the I call the prime list is my list, and then the viewer's choice list ended up being quite different. And one of the reasons why I think it could be different is that I really take a full album view on it because I have the opportunity to do that. Right. Like I listen to albums. This is my unit of listening is album beginning to end. I never skip tracks. And whenever I put my music back in, I pick up right where I left off, beginning to end, all the time, right? And so the trick is, like, if you listen to just singles from an album, as you say, it doesn't represent them all. Like, for example, Trevor Rabin's Rio for me. That's an album that I really love. There's some parts in it I can't quite get behind, a little bit lower spots, but overall it's fantastic. But the song Push, and that's, if I was going by singles, that'd be my album of the year. I mean, that song just blows my mind with the intensity and its ornate nature, you know. But the rest of the album doesn't really reflect that. So there's a situation where, like, the full album view changes, I think, when you look at the small album view, or just the video clip. Like, if you're just, as you say, a 30-second clip is not going to tell you much about the album. It's more just like, go check it out, right? Is the intent there for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to listen to the Spotify because a lot of times with the YouTube, I don't understand the words. And I'd want to know what they're saying. It makes it more in depth to the music to know what's going on. So I like the fact that Spotify will usually give me the lyrics, and that helps a lot.
Oh, yeah.
I have to agree with that. I have to agree with finding out what the lyrics was a big important part to me of what resonated, more or less on a specific album. If it was, I think we've talked about this, and I mean, it's probably out of turn to talk about it now, but that Yes album just really had me with the lyrics were so pertinent to where I was, in this part of my life. And it wasn't like Union where the first 3 songs just blow you away and you can't stop listening to the first 3 songs because they're so powerful. It had more of a, winding up to really like it feeling for me. The more I listened to it, the more I just couldn't stop. And that was a really interesting feeling or experience.
And this is, for me too, this is something that I struggle with a little bit because I am very much a music first person. Now, if lyrics are distractingly bad, then that'll tank it for me. You know what I mean? But for me, like, whenever I finally get to the point that I've really got my mind around some music, then the lyrics are, like, for me, added on top. And that's not the case for a lot of people. For a lot of people, the entry point is the lyrics, right? Which is sometimes what gets me when I listen to a lot of hip hop. Like, you can't judge a hip hop album based on its melodic content. That's not its point, right? It's so much about that kind of music. It's about its messaging and what it's trying to say. So I have to dig. Like, I'm listening to that. I think I was talking to you about this. That Billy Woods album is what I've been trying to get into recently. And superficially, musically, I'm still feels kind of weird. But, like, dig into the lyrics, and that's where the meat and potatoes is for me as well.
Yeah, it's interesting what brings somebody to like something more or less. We've talked about album covers and how that can play into it for me, which is weird. I had to, totally let go of some album covers that just freaked me out because I loved the music, but I just kept going, oh, that album cover is creepy. So yeah, that definitely plays into it as well for me. At least.
I know that was one that you had talked about, the Zimba album.
Yes.
You and I talked about that one. As great as the music is on that one, the cover creeps you out. And I actually thought that cover for that one was attention grabbing.
You thought it was cool.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Well, since we're starting to talk about the music, you want to go down through the list and maybe see if we have any reactions to some of this stuff that maybe we want to share out. Because clearly we want to talk about it. We're already right there.
Did you want to run down all 20, or did you want us to pick and choose?
Well, let's just pick and choose a little bit. Maybe if there's some that I don't cover. There's Kenny. Can you hear us, man?
Yeah, I can hear you. So,
Sweet.
believe it or not, I am a design engineer for AV, and I know how this stuff works, but I just can't make it work.
Technology's great until it doesn't work. That's it.
Yeah.
All right. So the going from 20 to 1, like the 20th one was the Beverly Glenn Copeland album, right? Which I thought was that's a great album. It didn't end up on my list, but I know that's another one that the lyrics were a powerful part of it, right? But I think a lot of us had some reactions to the Broken Bells album.
Yes.
That was number 19. So
yeah, we were listening to their debut album, weren't we?
I don't know that I think they have one album before that, but it had been a long stretch of time since the two albums. It's a studio project. I think between the guy who's from the Shins and Danger Mouse, I think, are the two guys that make up that project. So it's not a prime project, but they collaborate on it, I think, sporadically.
I mean, I'll jump in first on that one. It was kind of hard to pinpoint their sound, as we were saying earlier. A few tracks I hear the Doors, I hear some Pink Floyd, Moody Blues, and then they start with some pop with a chorus that sounds like 80s Human League or something. I mean, it's almost like it has an A side that is old school rock and a B side that's pop, but the tunes work, and even if the transitions are a little bit jarring, I thought the melodies were great. Trapdoors is my favorite track on there. It made me think, what if Crowded House and Oasis had teamed up on something, and then cue some Robert Smith Cure guitar. I mean, there's just so many influences there that jumped out. It's really hard to pinpoint, but I really liked it.
Yeah, it was one of my favorites too. I don't know why. It did have that kind of 80s pop, feel to it, just real melancholy and cool, and a lot of synthesizers. It reminded me of the Cocteau Twins. I don't know why. I listened to them a lot in the 80s, and I totally got a vibe of that kind of a vibe with it. But yeah, that's one I'm definitely is going to be in my top 5 for a while.
I know they're a band that was played on local on like the college radio frequently, Broken Bells. Although I used to get them and Sleigh Bells mixed up, because Sleigh Bells had that one album that one song that was everywhere for about a year. But I mean, it was like Sleigh Bells and Broken Bells, the two. I think this is the same album, but it maybe not. Maybe it was the one after that. But the way you guys are describing it reminds me of what I used to frequently hear on college radio from them.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah, there is a sort of a nostalgic retro aspect to what they do too. I don't know.
There's a love of like that 80s style. I think with a lot of people, like within the last few decades, it's like we got to bring back the 80s and the new wave, and that sort of dream pop culture.
Yeah, I saw them too. A little bit of like a Flaming Lips type thing too. Like I saw them sort of a psychedelic band, right? That was my percent. That's the way I framed them, right? I mean, of course they had those pop elements, but I really saw them like without a little bit less tongue in cheek, I think, than that Flaming Lips can kind of be sometimes, but still that same kind of like revamped atmospheric pop, that the Flaming Lips had going for themselves.
The neo-psych, as I call it.
Yeah.
Neo-psychedelia.
Yeah, I think if you can turn it on, at least for me, the test is if I can turn it on in the background, because I work from home. If I'm working on something and I turn it on in the background and nothing makes me turn around and go, what? And turn it off, then it's a winner. So I listened to that track. I probably listened to that album 3 times. So I thought it was.
When you turn your head, yeah, I know what you mean. Like you're listening to something for the first time, you're like, what the hell did I just hear? If you don't do that, then it's not resonating as much with you, because it gets you thinking, it gets your attention closer,
Right. Exactly. It's the
The
background.
best stuff definitely grows on you.
And that's funny because so I look back, Broken Bells didn't end up making my final list. And so I had to look back through my records to see where it happened. Where did that go? Where did that go? And so Broken Bells was in February, and it lost out to Gizmodrome, the Gizmodrome album, the Gizmodrome Live, that was. which then that went a long ways, which I really liked that album. But that one ended up losing out, I think, to like, what was it? Something ended up making the list, like Karate or something, I think. Because my one issue with the Gizmodrome was that as much as I love the album, I just wish that Stuart Copeland would have passed some vocals off to somebody else.
Really?
Yeah, well, I mean,
No, that's
you've got
interesting.
Adrian Belew, you've got Mark King in your band, right? And you're a great, great drummer.
Yeah.
But you hire a studio guy to come play drums for you live while you can hold guitar, and you know what I mean? Now, when he wasn't singing, he was playing drums, right? But once in my mind, I caught like, oh, well, he's not always, this is a live album too. And my visually, like when I see him in my mind come out from behind the drum set and stand to the front of the audience, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can buy that the same way. And that's just because he wants to sing, you know? Now, of course, and this is getting way off topic, but like Stuart Copeland has the right to do whatever he wants to do. It's all good. And he's had people sing his songs for the majority of his career.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
Sting is the guy who sang all of his songs, and I'm sure he's sick and tired of people saying like, "Oh yeah, you know, that's a Sting song." No, that's my song, right? So he has the right to do that. But at the same time, when you've got a guy like, you know, Mark King and Adrian Belew in the band,
Right.
it seems smart.
It's interesting that you mentioned Gizmodrome because that really showed me how interesting this whole process is. Because that was my first favorite. I listened to it nonstop for probably 5 weeks. I mean, it was in our house every time anybody did any chores. That's what we put on. And then when it came down to, you know, later, I wasn't listening to it so much. I started judging it for the fact that it was live. And that was so hard to compare live to something else. And so I voted it out because it was live and didn't sound as perfectly clean. I don't know. It was, and then I regretted it. So that's what's just really cool about this whole process is that like you're gonna like and change and it's just all fun.
And some
Right.
of it's
That's
the
really
mood you're in for the day, right? I mean, in some cases, you could throw the same 2 albums at us and would fall off the fence
Totally
the other
different
direction.
answer. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And that's the thing too. That's why, like, by the time you get to the end, you've probably let go of like 3 of your favorite albums, but at least you know the ones that you ended up with are quality.
Yeah.
Nothing else. Right. Okay, so somebody else mentioned Wolfpack earlier. That's number 17. Let's talk about Wolfpack. Because man, so much of that album is unbelievable. Those guys' chops, their the catchy way they write tunes and all that stuff is just so great. And this is one where the album view made them, in my opinion, lose out. Because at the end of the album, they had that one kind of funny, I don't know if how many of us listened all the way to the album, but there's this kind of funny track called The Smile Meditation at the end. And it's this little ambient thing where the guy's talking about his guy, some guru teaching him how to smile and how he's interpreting it through music. It's cute, but it really could be like a minute long and it would serve its purpose, but it goes on for like 5 minutes. And I've never made it through it. I mean, I have once or twice, enough to know what it does. But if I have to skip a track on the album, that's something that's like red flag, you know? So, man, if that one track wasn't on there, it probably would have made the list. But for me, that was the stumbling block. But regret, you know, I regret the fact that so many great tracks in that album don't get to be on my top 20. But, you know, the end result is I got to expose myself to the album and appreciate it, right?
Yeah, man, there's some good 70s funk on there, R&B sounds, great grooves. I mean, even some Jackson 5 kind of sounds. I love the old school keys, leaning heavy on the bass. There was just a lot to like about that album.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was really fun. Really fun. Made me want to get up and dance to it. It was just really fun. Yeah.
Yeah. What else? You know what's next?
Mammoth WVH.
Mammoth WVH. I know you got some opinions about that one, Brent. Let's go there.
Man, I tell you what, I was disappointed that we didn't score this one higher.
You know, this part of the process we could talk about in a minute too.
Yeah, and I know it's a sophomore album that doesn't suffer any sophomore slump or anything. I mean, you know, Wolfgang, he could have taken the easy road, right, and just carbon copied his father Eddie, but you know, he really went in his own direction. I mean, you can hear the influence, but that's kind of where it stops. I mean, it's differentiated. I mean, when the official band lineup only has one name, right? I mean, Wolfie played every instrument in the studio. He played lead guitar, rhythm, bass, keys, drums, all of it, and did all the vocals and backing vocals too. I mean, Uh, Van Halen fans can love it. It's also accessible to a larger, maybe more modern audience. And the songs don't just sound the same, yet they're very cohesive. You can pull a thread through it. Take a Bow is my favorite track, and they're all good. It's just one of those albums that you do want to run down top to bottom without skipping anything. And he's just a cool guy, right? I mean, Spin, you sent an article recently about him mending fences with Michael Anthony, who he replaced in Van Halen. I mean, that alone just shows what a cool guy he is.
Yeah, the proficiency of that album, in my opinion, was just amazing. I mean, and I don't know how it didn't end up in the top 5, but so many of them, I'm like, this is top 5, this is top 5, this is top 5. I mean, it was like, how can I not put that one in top 5? Because it was like that with Trevor Rabin, with even listening to Steve Howe on the Yes album. I mean, I was like, how could I possibly? They're perfect. And Steve Wilson too. I mean, it's perfection. They're so talented, and their songs are so well written. And I just admire it. It was fantastic to listen to.
Yeah, not to jump off subject, but Steven Wilson, I mean, the music is so tight and so good. It was about 5 listens before I even managed to pay any attention to the lyrics. And then I'm like, holy smokes, the lyrics are off the chain.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
For sure.
Yeah, we'll come back to Steven Wilson. There's a lot to talk about with that album, in my opinion, for sure. And the video, the thing that you were talking about, how he replaced Michael Anthony in Van Halen. That was a part of that article that I thought was so interesting, was that actually that particular incarnation of Van Halen grew out of Wolfgang's interest in it. Because his father had recently become sober and was having a hard time becoming inspired, and felt, having a hard time finding ways to be creative. And his association and his collaborations with his son was kind of what helped him decide, hey, I'm gonna go ahead and keep going. So it's funny that he, from one perspective, you could say he replaced Michael Anthony, but on the second hand, he's the whole reason that last version, we got that last Van Halen out of the group.
Yep.
Yeah, I love to see that. I love to see the father-son.
That's another thing that's going to come up in a couple of weeks. So I've been looking into that right
Sting
now.
was touring with his son right now, and obviously, with the Eagles, Glenn Frey having passed, his son has taken over for the Eagles, and you just see a lot of that. I just really love it.
It's a pattern, you had Jason Bonham with Zeppelin. There's been a lot of cases.
Exactly. That's a great one. Yeah.
My wife's a massive Monkees fan, and so we're kind of leaning more toward the Nesmith specifically. So the Nesmith people are going to carry on the Nesmith legacy. I'm paying attention to the Nesmith kids music, so that makes some sense that like you said, Wolfgang and Glenn Frey's son. Maybe that's the thing. When these bands are gone, their children will carry on the legacy. People worry they're going to be gone.
They'll have super kids. They'll be called super kids. So that'd be kind of
next generation. Take your favorite band, then the next generation if they have kids.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to, but I skipped over Xenia Rabinos. At number, it's 18. 18, yeah. And that was the one that I connected with a lot. That particular album is really diverse. And when I played that one for people sort of just off to the side, there's a lot of looks like that at a little bit. It's an eclectic album, but it's also really super expressive. And her voice and sort of her, I don't know, I've said this more times, the convictions that she has sort of holds that album together in a way it's difficult to ignore it, even though it seems sort of stylistically jarring.
I thought it was incredibly unique in what she did. And oddly enough, when I was first listening to it, I was at my mom's house. And part of my love of it was that my mom loved it so much. So she always wanted to listen to it. And so I'd be listening to it again. It really kind of grew on me. But yeah, I think we both just really liked the fact that it was so, diverse, like you said, and unique.
Some of those tracks you can really hear Spanish roots under the hip hop.
Oh yeah.
And I thought it was cool. It was bilingual. The auto-tune, that was kind of an interesting choice in the parts that had that.
As a musical tool, right? Not auto-tune used for the purpose of fixing poor singing,
vocal problems, right.
But as a specific sound to be used.
Right.
That's a distinction I think that's important to make, you know. And she's using it that way, which I think is cool.
Yeah.
Here's another one I think we probably has some opinions on is the Riverside album, that Riverside ID Entity. Who wants to run with this one? Okay, so I'll start. ID Entity, of course, it didn't end up making my top 20 because it had this. I have this weird rule about my top 20 where I don't want to have one artist like dominate by accident, right? Like if I go out and go on a run and want to buy 10 Frank Zappa albums, which has happened to me before, you know, it can't be the year of Zappa on my list, right? So it's a curious thing because it's the same guy on both projects with Lunatic Soul, which did make my top 20, and the ID Entity album. And the Lunatic Soul album kind of collapsed several different both my love of Marius Duda and his music, but also like my interest in Nordic music that I had on the side too. So I was kind of able to collapse those two things and cover two bases at once. But it's not because I thought ID Entity was a poor album, because I don't. Like, if it wasn't for Lunatic Soul, ID Entity would be on my list as high as. Because I really love about that album is the way that he mines that 80s era of progressive rock. Because that's when I jumped on board with progressive rock, right? Progressive rock fans, the traditional or guys, or the Yes guys in Genesis and all that stuff. But I jumped on board like, Moving Pictures, Marillion's Misplaced Childhood, 90125, that stuff. So from my perception of what progressive rock is, it's very like that the age of the DX7. They're not so much about the Moog synthesizer and more about that era of synthesizers. And I think that Maurice Duda is really good on this album of dedicating his attention to that sound, because he hasn't always done that. Riverside in its past has had a lot of metal in their background, a lot of kind of prog metal sounds that he downplays a lot on this ID Entity album. I think
Have a
partially
little
because
synth
a
wave
couple
mixed
years
into
ago their
there
guitar
too.
player died, so they've replaced their guitar.
Peter Grzinski, yeah.
Yep. And so I think that he's been a little bit more open to finding different ways to incorporate the harmonic sounds of the band, as far as he goes too.
This may be a stretch, but for me, the whole time I was listening to that album, I kept thinking of Queensryche, Operation Mindcrime.
Oh my
It just
God.
it
So
had
true.
kind of a similar feel to it.
Yeah.
One of my
It's
very favorite
80s,
albums.
of course. Yeah.
Yep. I got the same. The interesting thing for me is it was one of the first albums that we were listening to in the spring. And it was really my first introduction to that kind of music. I have a lot of friends that listen to Dream Theater, and, I get a little bit from that, but I was a huge Queensryche fan in college. And yeah, I couldn't stop listening to it. And then when Spotify would play other things after the album was over, I kept wanting to, I want that one, I want that. Like, their music, it exemplified everything that I love. And then later I'd be letting Spotify pick, and it would pick Riverside songs from the album that I had forgotten were from that album. And I'd run over and go, oh, I got to figure out what that one is, because I loved it so much. So it really was my number one album for the year, because I had never been introduced to it. I didn't have any, background in it and listening to them before. And it just blew me away.
You hadn't liked it, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a long history, Riverside. I mean, that album thing, I liked their ADHD album, but I always struggled with them a bit, unfortunately. Knowing about them going back to the mid 2000s. And I've always thought that the vocal style was a little bit of that sort of cliche-ish, sort of like post Pink Floyd, David Gilmour-esque, and there was no punch to their music. But I think, after Peter Grzinski passed away, they kind of dropped down. Although I know a lot of people love the record after that, Love and the Fear in the Time Machine, I think it is.
I love that album.
Yeah, and I remember liking parts of it, but I just I've kind of struggled with them, and so I didn't really spend a lot of time with it like a lot of my peers did. What people in the prog rock community were New Riverside, and this is the first album in like 4 years or something, so they're gonna totally talk about it and let it will get a lot of buzz among those circles. And I just maybe call it time or whatever else. I've kind of put my Riverside fandom off the side, but given the descriptions, I probably need to bring it back in again.
Yeah, they're but before Love and the Time Machine.
In the Time Machine, yeah.
Yeah. I was a kind of a medium Riverside fan too, because I was medium on there. I'm real picky about my prog metal. And so like for sometimes prog metal all starts to sound the same to me. I have to really dig super deep on it. And so there was a sense that when they were in that prog metal side, they were just another a good prog metal band, but another one. And so whenever they have started to downplay that side a little bit, I became more interested in them. And I've really liked the last couple of albums that they've done that have turned that down. I mean, it's still there, but it's just turned down a little bit.
Lunatic Soul isn't exactly stylistically the same as that. Isn't it more? It's less. It's metallic. It's more atmospheric. Yeah.
Lunatic Soul's totally more atmospheric.
Yeah.
Usually synthesizer based. I think his last album before this one, he didn't have any guitars on it. He played everything on bass, and all of his leads were like piccolo bass.
Interesting.
Yeah, a unique guy for sure.
I think that album was popular the first couple months of last year, but then it just kind of went by the wayside for a lot of people's playlists. If it had come out late in the year, a lot of these end of year lists, it probably would have been in many people's top 10s, but because of it didn't get the addiction for people. So, unfortunately, I think it's stupid. I think it's stupid when you release an album shouldn't matter, but it's sort of like the whole like award season stuff with the Academy Awards and all that stuff. It's like, well, you got to put the movie out at the end of the year if you want to get an Academy Award, because you put it out in April and they're not going to remember it.
Yep.
And that's one of the reasons why I started doing this weird system of eliminations, because I get to the end of the year and go, okay, what were my favorite albums? And it's just what I was listening to at the time. My objectivity is totally lost. Right. So having some kind of a record and going back and like, okay, this is where, that there's a logic to it at least. So I can justify it, at least. I can argue the point, at least in the end of the day. Okay, next up I have Johan Johansson's Engleborn and Variations. Opinions on that one?
It was really cool.
Yeah,
interesting. It was interesting. It was very cool and very relaxing and very calm, but just I can't explain it in words. I can just say that I loved it every time I put it on.
Yeah, smooth. I think that's a good
one.
Yeah, Icelandic, right?
Yeah, he's Icelandic.
He did some cool soundtrack stuff too. I was checking out some of his stuff on Spotify. I checked out the soundtrack to The Theory of Everything, and man, it is good.
I discovered him from the Arrival soundtrack.
Yeah,
that is so cool.
And he's never hit me wrong. I probably have listened to one of his albums the last 5 years, and every single time it's just he is brilliant at being so minimalist. Like there's really not that much happening with his music, but he mixes the timbres in such a way that's just like it's conjuring. I keep saying he's a conjurer. That Odi Adamo, the first track of that one, like that when he hits that very first little melody with just a tinge of electronic, affectation. Immediately it's like the world sits still, and then you watch there's a video clip that I put up a couple times of a live group playing it, and the intensity, like it's just going, like this, and on the recording you hear the intensity but you don't see it. It's just like this drone almost, but the orchestra is just going at it, trying to get it. So it's that like underlying intensity that's underneath that sheen. I think that is one of the things that really drives a lot of his work forward, to be honest.
And as a guy that my degree is film scoring, I listened to it. It is so difficult to capture that, especially these days. If you don't have the money to get a symphony in the studio, or even a string section in the studio, and trying to capture it on your computer with samples, it's so difficult. So how he pulled that up and how he did that, just, man, he's awesome.
Yeah, he's very good at mixing electronic and physical too.
Hybrid, yeah.
That's like his hallmark. It's a very cyborg thing, but it doesn't present that way. That's the thing that's needed. You really have to look close to see where that distinction lies.
Right. Him and Joseph Trapanese, I think that's say his last name, Trapanese, the guy who did Tron. He's really good at that as well. He's another one. If you want to listen to that genre, the hybrid type of score, he's another one. It's just amazing. So, and I can't do it.
Right on. Okay, so the next one up is the Lemon Twigs, the Everything Harmony, and I have a little bit of an admission to make on this one. I cheated you guys a little bit here. Here's what happened. So whenever I put up make my final top 20 bracket, I do it so that the album I listen to the most in in spring goes past the first elimination, and the one that I listen to the most in the fall goes past the first elimination, because then like things get my first and second one get they run into each other too soon, right? So like albums that could be potentially the first and numbers 1 and 2 get ousted in the first round and it didn't work. So that works fine for me. But I used for you guys, I used the ratings from rateyourmusic.com because I couldn't find another objective way to do it, right? So that worked out fine because that meant in the spring, the most listened to album was Always, and that's on the list. We'll talk about that one in a minute. But for the other one, it ended up being Tyler the Creator's Igor, which is a fine album, but it really stuck out. And it was just going to go straight to the top if I did that, you know. And I just I don't really feel like this represents the listening as much. And then the Lemon Twigs had gotten eliminated early on. The Lemon Twigs ended up being my number 2 album of the year, and I'm like, I don't think anybody's going to complain if I switch out Tyler the Creator with the Lemon Twigs. I think we can argue that one pretty. That's a pretty decent trade. So I hope that you don't get too upset with me about that one. But I made an editorial call on that one, if you don't mind, because I think that Lemon Twigs album is so brilliant. It kills me. And I know it's super nostalgic and I know it's super retro, but it's so good at what it does. And it captures so many facets of on the one hand, like Simon and Garfunkel and that era. But then somebody pointed out to me, like almost even Air Supply. There's an Air Supply aspect to what they're doing that I think is pertinent. You know, you can't ignore that. And then the straight line that kind of happens between you think about it between like Simon and Garfunkel and the Beatles and the Beach Boys and Bread and blah, and then all of a sudden you're at the Air Supply. There's a branch where that progression makes sense, and I just see the Lemon Twigs following that really distinctly.
Yeah, I'd say for 90% of that album, I mean, if you had a vinyl pressing of it and could go back in time and slip it into a record store like Waterloo Records or something in the mid 70s, nobody would even blink.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's so unusual nowadays. You know, some of the music that we listen to did have kind of that old 70s feel. And this one I just loved from the very beginning for that reason. I got a total John Denver feel because my grandmother loved, every time I'd go see her with my guitar, she'd be like, play John Denver. And she could never get enough of it. And when I listened to this, I was like, my grandmother would love this. You know, that was kind of neat for me. But then I asked my husband, like, is there something wrong with me that I'm so attached to these the music from the 70s, you know, that I grew up with, that's what I'm picking every time almost, you know? And he's like, no, you like what you like. And, you know, we can all appreciate, you know, different things like different paintings and things, but do we really want them in our house? And, you know, it's all personal. So yeah, this was definitely a favorite.
I know some people that love the Lemon Twigs. I've never been able to get into them though. So I'm not surprised at this time. I mean, Mike Portnoy of Dream Theater, now with Dream Theater again, has even talked about them frequently. So who's also a big champion of like Jellyfish and kind of more modern music having that retro feel. So I don't know what it is, but their vocals are a little bit, I don't know, it's almost overtly folky, and so I've never been able to latch on despite the writing. But you know, I should, they're another band that I should like on paper. It hasn't clicked at this point, unfortunately, including this new record from them. But one of the other YouTubers I follow closely named Matt O'Leary, him and his wife love the Lemon Twigs. They're like biggest Lemon Twigs fans that I know of. So
his review of that was the one that made me take the dive.
Interesting. Well, I'll have to let him know that, you know, we're talking about it because he'll appreciate it.
I like just the good songwriting, just without the overproduction, you know, just that. I think a lot of people really like that these days because we've been so just slammed the last couple of years with just overproduced albums. And so it is kind of nice to hear, you know, just good songwriting, you know, broken down. So.
And more simple. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you said that.
And
Less
you
is
talk,
more. Yeah.
and you talk about the production on that too. This is interesting because I see all the waveforms when I put these together for my blogs, and so many of the waves are just like maxed out. You know what I mean by that, right? But the lemon twigs, you actually can see the waveform. Like it's not just like hyper compressed, as loud as you can get everything maxed out. You can actually see the shape of the song in the waveform.
Nice. They didn't overmaster it.
Right.
Like the loudness wars. So the peak of that was like the mid 2000s or the late 2000s, but it still is going on. A lot of modern pop music that you hear that's like on the radio or whatever, or on like TikTok, does sound way overproduced, but I don't necessarily think of the Lemon Twigs and a lot of the sort of like indie kind of stuff would necessarily reach that audience always.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad that.
Anybody want to add anything else on that one?
Overproduction can be a complete turnoff for me too.
Yeah. If I'm in the mood for it, it's great. There's plenty of it out there, right? But sometimes you just want something that's nice. I'll throw in Joe Bonamassa in the background, or even Miles Davis kind of blue. Whenever your ears get so fatigued from the overproduction, but this album as well.
Anybody want to add anything else on that Lemon Twig so we can? Good. So here's the next one. Here's one. Lisa Belladonna's Destinations. This one came out of nowhere for me. This is a last minute thing, but man, okay. So I picked out this one because it was the oldest thing on my wish list. It had been on my wish list probably for about 2.5 years. And I'm like, I'm going to either get it or get rid of it. We're to that point. But I'd hung on to it for so long because I'm a fan of like Jean-Michel Jarre and that 70s Moog experimentation, period of experimentation that was happening with Moog synthesizers, right? And so what's cool about these days, there's people that are still kind of doing that, but they aren't doing it with the experimental side. They're benefiting from the fact that experimentation has already happened, and now they have the mastery of those instruments. And that's what I see Lisa Belladonna being able to do really well, especially on this album. There's no mistakes. There's no, I'll see if this works going on there. She knows exactly what she's doing. If you watch her on those videos and she's just tweaking knobs and playing not just the keyboard, but the whole synthesizer. I think that's underappreciated.
Agreed. Yes.
And I think she's good at that. So the next one I have up at number 11, I believe, is Out the Always Blue Rev. Anybody like that one, or yes or no?
Yeah, I loved it. I love very melody heavy. I really, really liked their melodies. And they kind of don't sound like anybody, and yet they sound really familiar at the same time. If that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
It's very, very accessible. They're actually playing Austin in April at the Austin Psychedelic Festival.
Oh,
looking forward to hopefully going to check them out. But it's just cool indie rock.
Yeah. I liked it
the
a lot.
live videos that I've seen of them have been really good. If they're able to do live, like in live, not like, live at KXP live, but I mean like real live, what they seem like they're able to do, it could be a really killer show. I think that, and I think you're hitting it on the head too, because there's a lot that's familiar about them and what they do, because they mix up like almost every post-millennial pop rock style you can think of. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Shoegaze, power pop, jangle pop, all those like I said, hyphenated pop subgenres that they have out there now. They're really able to mix them all up in a way that really feels cohesive. In a way, like, and we talked about Jellyfish earlier, or even the Lemon Twigs. You're looking at the point now where we can look back at the late the 90s and the early aughts with its own sense of nostalgia, and say like, well, this is like almost what Jellyfish would do if they were paying homage to the early aughts. I think that's kind of what Always is able to do. And again, I have always the mindset, if you have to pick 5 or 6 people to refer to explain a group, they're probably doing something more original than not, because nothing comes from nowhere, right? So, I mean, if it's very obvious, like, okay, one of my top albums was the Crown Lands album. Okay, love that album, and because it hits me in my Rush nerve. Okay, they're just so dang good at hitting that Rush thing, and I should hate that. It should really bother me, but they're good at it. It's like a guilty pleasure, right? But those guys aren't. That's beyond nostalgia. That's like you know, a single-minded dedication to a band and really trying to recreate that. That's a little different than coming up with a whole different like recombination of things that were already there.
Yeah,
Right.
what I thought about Always is that it was so catchy. Like there's a real talent to having these songs that kind of stick in your head all day long. And that's what I got. I just kept singing those songs for days. So that's what I really liked about it.
It's in repetition.
They're massively popular on Rate Your Music, and those guys on Taste Like Music, they always like their go-to.
Yeah.
And I've known about them for a long time, but I've never really like spent enough time. They do remind me of some other bands I've heard of, but I think what you said earlier about how they sound familiar, but they don't sound exact like anyone else. That's kind of why. I mean, so I honestly, I probably could like them a lot more than I do at this point. But the record you're talking about is it's through the roof on Rate Your Music.
Right. Well, and that's what, one of the places where I get new music for the year is I kind of look at the first albums on all the top 10 lists from the previous year and then listen to the next year. And so Always was a really big player at the end of last year. Like it was on all the top 10 lists everywhere. So, and then I heard that key change and Belinda Says that's the one that was the hook that got me on that.
Was
one.
the song
Key change towards the end of that
Pharmacist?
song. Do say again?
Pharmacist, was that the biggest track on that?
I don't know which was the biggest one.
That was the first one they released.
Yeah.
Because geez, I don't know. I take some of this stuff with a grain of salt, but have you ever had that experience where you know of a band and suddenly like a bunch of other people are talking about them? Like you're like, why are you talking about that band? I've known about that band. There was nothing special about them before. And then suddenly it's like, oh no, everyone loves them. Paramore this past year would be one example, although they've been around a while, but they've become almost like a household name and they're going to open for Taylor Swift. I think Always is kind of in that category for me. Like I've known about them, but suddenly now they're just this massive, like every band that's going to come up now is going to reference one of their influences being Always. You know what I mean?
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Or you're Kate Bush and you get on Stranger Things.
Right. Something like
Oh, that does happen.
a viral,
that was a big one.
Viral moment, Yeah.
And we're like, we're so cool. We were listening to that back in the 80s.
Way back in the day.
Actually, and that was why Kate Bush last year, she was one that I put in the mix because I've really never listened to her albums. Like I've known her for a long time, but like I never really sat down and listened to the Hounds of Love, which is a great album. That was one that made like last year's top 20.
I know how that was when Steven Wilson referenced her album. Wasn't Hounds of Love? It was The Dreaming. It came out with Hank Cannot Erase. I saw the documentary he talked about, and then I just wanted to hear that album. And I'd known some of her songs before that, but then she's a name that's gotten pushed down everyone's face for the last decade and change. And suddenly with Stranger Things, it's like no one, even my wife who can't stand her, hasn't been able to ignore her.
All right, number 10. Here's one for you guys. I know we have some opinions on the Yes, Mirror to the Sky album.
I talked a little bit about it.
You did.
Yeah.
You did.
It's better than the last two albums.
I'll agree. I think.
I agree with that.
Yeah. I
think
was hyped up about it, and it was good, but I don't know. I mean, part of it is, that they're trying to do trying to capture that feel of their classic sound. I don't know. I think part of it is, am I going to listen to Yes or am I going to listen to something else? I got to be in the right mood to listen to Yes. But yeah, it's still, even though you don't have Chris Squire anymore, much better than Heaven and Earth and better than The Quest too. That epic, what is it, the title track, I think?
The Mirror to the Sky, yeah.
Mirror to the Sky, yeah. It had some serious vintage Yes moments I did appreciate.
Absolutely. I love that it was Steve Howe. I mean, back to the original Yes. I was very nostalgic about that. And the lyrics, I mean, he's really in this place where all the lyrics lead up to it's kind of a theme album, where every song leads into another in terms of, what it's about and ends up in that, what is it all about and all the things you reflect on when you're 50 and older. And I loved that. And then there was just so many little things back to that original Yes sound with the synthesizers and the guitar. And I just couldn't get enough of it. It's amazing.
Well, it didn't sound as saccharine. That's what I was on a stream a few months ago. The recent Yes, even the last couple decades, a lot of it sounds saccharine to me.
Yes.
Like, yeah, it's like
Agreed.
AOR. it sounded more like the music they did in the 70s. They did some music in the 90s that reminded me a little bit of that, but this is the first album, at least in 20 years, that I've noticed. Yeah, okay, they're really brought back stuff I enjoy. I don't know how much I'm gonna be like going back in 10 or 20 years. I listen to my favorite Yes albums. Is Mirror to the Sky gonna be in there? I don't know. That remains to be seen. But at least I'll give them credit for sounding better, more like what I like from Yes.
Yeah.
At what point do you declare a band a different name? This is that, Jeff. This is that.
Okay, you're
Chip
gonna open the can of worms, bud.
Yes.
I mean, so true.
You're right.
I mean,
yeah.
if how many original members like remaining qualified to say this is even the same project anymore? I don't know.
Right.
And it's
That
like
is
Yes Who album too, and yeah. I mean, Howe is an original member. He's the only classic member left, but
yeah. His production quality though is amazing. I mean, it is just so, there's so much perfection in it, and it just it just blew me away. Yeah, I was really glad that he produced it. But I'm with you. It was like Crown Lands, with the Rush. It's like really not Yes versus Yes in a way, and it's hard to know how to feel about that.
Mixed feelings at best.
Especially when you're going up against Trevor Rabin and his solo album.
Right.
That's so much like Yes,
That was a very interesting thing that happened this year that I got a chance to kind of put those two side to side. And how are we really doing, guys? How are we doing? I think, and this is again been a long-standing philosophical study for me about the identity of Yes and how much it can take, right? Yes is particularly one of those bands that's interesting because they've always been defined by their change. They've had the unusual situation of having two major defining lineups, right? I mean, you have the 70s group, and then you have the group that really put them out there in front with 90125, right? So they were able to define themselves twice in their history. And in between had lots of other memberships and had some very successful albums in there. If you're a fan that you like the Drama album, these folks out there that like, see, if you're like a Yes fan, but like, well, I only believe that Yes is a band if this person is in there, but I like Drama. I'm like, well, then that doesn't hold water philosophically, right? And so for a long time, I really held like this thing like, I think yet there's a possibility that everybody in Yes could die and there could still be a Yes that works. I had this theory for a long time. I was clinging to this theory. And as a matter of fact, if you look back at my blog, I predicted that Billy Sherr would be the bass player. I predicted that Jay Shellen would be the drummer. And of course, once this is whenever John Davidson first came on. This is when I was like, okay, let's see what happens, right? And so the only piece I didn't predict was Jeff Downs because I kind of still think he's an old schooler in some ways, and he's he's the most problematic person in the new Yes for me personally. That's just me. Although he's fine, he's great. He's actually better on this album because he's not trying to be Rick Wakeman.
Right.
He does better whenever he's just being himself, and so whenever he's being himself, he's more like kind of hokey '80s themes, right? He's so great with the Buggles, for example. Yep. So brilliant with that band. And when he's able to recapture that, he fits in well. And I think he does that a lot on this new album, which makes it kind of sound like Asia sometimes. Yeah. But that's okay. I don't mind that so much. Anyway, so the point really being is like, I'm to the point now where, okay, it's a little weird. It does feel a little weird. But the end result, I think, is still cool, and it still gives me Yes vibes. So I'm still going to stay on board. But your point about like, will this be my favorite Yes album 10 years down the road? We'll see. That's a time will tell thing. But I also think it's the best thing they've done since the ladder.
Yeah, I think that's how I'm at with it.
Yep.
I think it's interesting how willing we are to accept John Davidson for John Anderson. I mean, their voice is so similar. Mm-hmm. And yet, there's all these bands like Journey. They have a lead singer who's trying to be like,
Perry.
Yeah.
I won't even listen. I can't even listen to it. It's so different. It's just hard for me.
Yeah.
But yet the Queen with Adam, what's his name?
Lambert.
I love him. I love him.
Do you? Okay.
And it's just interesting what we'll take and what we won't take, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think what I find interesting about the older bands is as they continue through time, and they get new members in the band, I always kind of wonder in the back of my head, whenever the old member leaves, what effect was that old member having on the sound? Was he really like the writer? Was he the man? But when he left, it still sounded great. Or like when Portnoy left Dream Theater and Mangini took over, they took on a different sound. So how did Portnoy's presence affect the writing? And I kind of look for that as I'm listening to these older bands put out these albums, except for Queensryche, right? Because they just crap it after that all broke up. There was nothing good.
Yeah.
But you kind of wonder the influence that the people who left had on the band, and you kind of see that as they're moving along in their career, and I always find that really interesting.
Really good.
Yeah, I mean, Chris Squire, you think about it, he was a longtime member of Yes, and then Heaven and Earth is not exactly a liked album by most fans. The Quest was not dramatically better for some people, but I don't know if they would have made Mirror to the Sky with him. Who knows?
Yeah.
Marillion changed dramatically when Fish left.
Yeah. Mic drop.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it happens. Sometimes it happens for the better.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But
Well,
there's a band I love called Mute Math, who they lost their bass
love
player,
Mute Math.
and then they put their next record out. It became my favorite record, even though they became a 3-piece. I don't know how they did it, but they did it.
Yeah. And again, Van Halen with Sammy Hagar, that whole thing, that when that opened up a whole world of possibilities. So you kind of see how the presence of the members and who's dominant and who pushes their views. And once they go, then everybody else is like, oh God, let's open this up. And
the band is something to prove. I think it's when they lose that member. I think part of it is
true. Good point.
Yeah, my husband and I have this ongoing debate about, are bands better when they start playing for themselves versus playing what's popular or what's going to get them the record, to be bought. And he doesn't like it. He thinks at that point they're being selfish because they're not playing what he likes to listen to. But I see it as, just a difference. It's just creative. But when they bring somebody else in, that does kind of make it different and give it a new vibe potentially. And so I think it's different.
Yep.
Yeah.
I know Brent and I, not to belabor this point too much, but it's interesting. Brent and I have been talking on and off about Pink Floyd and Syd Barrett, right? Like when Syd Barrett left the band, like talk about like taking out your pride. He was Pink Floyd. That was his thing. He was the songwriter. He was the main guy. So they put David Gilmour in, right? And then the whole band scrambled to try to figure out how are we going to write songs. Yeah. Like if you listen to 2 or 3 albums after that first album, it's like Roger Waters writes a song, David Gilmour writes a song, Richard Wright writes a song. Let's do this, let's do that. Just throwing spaghetti at the wall, just trying to figure it out. And then in the end, like it all kind of got absorbed in Roger Waters later on. But in the beginning, it's like you say, you took that component out, and they're all just trying to scramble to figure out how we're going to make a second album.
Right. Yeah, you feel it start to come together with metal, right?
Yeah.
And then of course you move into Dark Side when all stars align.
Was Animals before metal or after?
No, it's 70. Animals was 77.
Yeah.
Metal was 72.
I mean, I've become partial to some of the records before Dark Side of the Moon.
Recently, for me too.
I know most people look at that as like metal sort of being they defined what they became, what they were going to be after Sid left, and then with Dark Side and with Wish You Were Here and Animals and then The Wall. But that's the thing is if you have one person who's doing the writing, you don't have songs if you don't have someone doing the songwriting. So that's a big part of it. Now some of it could be the people that are in the band that aren't doing the songwriting actually do have good songs, say like George Harrison with the Beatles, or and they just weren't able to actually release that stuff. Steve Hackett after he left Genesis. So
I have to say, I know it's off topic, but I've been listening to Tears for Fears Elemental nonstop, and I didn't even know that bass player that was in all the MTV videos isn't even in the group anymore. Like it sounds so much to me because the lead singer is the one that wrote all of their beginning songs, I guess.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize it, and I love it so much.
Yeah, I love Tears for Fears too. Fantastic band.
Great.
Yep.
All right, let's get back on it though. Let's talk about this Khruangbin album. Mordecai, that's the kind of like Houston-based kind of what did I call them? Kind of exotic funk group on the chill side.
Definitely
Not
some
so
Latin
much.
mixed in there.
Yeah. That one for me kind of got edged out a little bit because as much as I think it's a great kind of, as you say, a background listen. Kenny was talking about this earlier. When I started to look at it a little bit too closely, it kind of broke down a little bit, if that makes sense. But its function as a like a super groovy vibe album, you can't mess with it. You know what I mean? Like, so it's one of the albums you like for evening music, like when you're sitting down with the family to eat dinner, pop it on. Everybody's going to be like this. We listened to it whenever we drove down to Disney this summer. My wife and I listened to it like 4 times in the road. It was like perfect on the road, you know, because you could talk and chit chat or whatever, but still you could not talk and still enjoy it, right? But then when I started getting meticulous with it, as much as I enjoyed it, other things kind of edged it out on that basis.
I love that it really brings some diversity to what we listened to this year. A lot of what you introduced us to, or introduced me to, was definitely stuff that I would never have come across. And like you said, it did have a really good funky feel to it that was just, you know, nice and different. And I liked it for that reason.
Yeah, and that's part of the goal too. Like, so much of this is just about exposure, and myself too. Like, I'm putting stuff out. I'll grab stuff. Like, I'll see if this sticks. You know, and if it does, that's great. If it's not, that's great too. But it just helps keep things churning. You know.
Some music is good as just driving music, and if that works for you, it doesn't have to be or workout music or something. You know, it doesn't have to be something you listen to so closely that you need to understand what exactly they're doing. It's just music that serves another function.
Yeah. Well, I know the next one up, several people had commented on us, this Gunship Unicorn album.
I mean, this would have easily made my top 5 in a solo vote. As far as synthwave goes, I think Gunship, their sound is just it's more 80s than the actual 80s. You know, I mean, it manufactures nostalgia for you. It makes you feel like you remember it from back in the day, even though it didn't exist. You know, it's like Unicorn is like a musical version of Stranger Things, and ironically, it has that John Carpenter feel, and he collaborated on the album, right?
Yeah.
Some of the other I looked it up. Some of the other folks that collaborated on this: Dave Lombardo from Slayer, Gavin Rossdale from Bush is on there, and here's my favorite: the shirtless saxophone player with the codpiece from the Lost Boys is on that album.
Oh wow!
That's some deep cuts.
Everybody knows what I'm talking about
cuts,
there.
Yeah.
Right. Played with Tina Turner, but the videos, you know, I mean, I love those too, right? You got the Masters of the Universe action figure animation. It's so self-aware. That's just another album I could run down top to bottom and just be filled with artificial nostalgia.
I feel like it could be a good soundtrack to any movie. Like, it was just had such a good feel to it. I just felt like it could be a soundtrack, but it could also be something that you're dancing to at a club. It could be something that you're just listening to. I mean, I just love that synthwave sound so much, and they did it well. They did it as well as any song that I had ever heard in the 80s. So that was
they're super good at that synthwave stuff, and I've kind of dabbled in other synthwave things, but they're able to take it and I think push it into like an almost past what its original intent was. You know what I mean? Like, they're actually garnering their own identity without selling out their mission statement.
Yeah. I found it interesting that Unicorn rose to the top, and we didn't review another one, Dark All Day or something.
That was in the spring. You're right. That one got edged out by M83's Fantasy album.
Oh.
And that one and then M83's kind of got edged out later on. But I actually think that this is the third album from Gunship, and I think this is their best one.
I agree.
To be honest.
I love it.
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I liked it. I think it's cool that you look back now on all these new bands that have come up with the synthwave sound. I kind of look back, and I do remember having conversations with you and Conrad and Steve about, you know, the new devices that were coming out in the 80s. We were like, oh, that's fake music. They're fake drum machines, right? All this stuff is fake. And like, we played real instruments back then. And then today, it's like, you know, the bands are taking on and they're coming up with that sound, and now we just love it. So I do. When I hear it, I love it to death. Yeah. So I think it's awesome that they've taken it on.
And I love the melodic material on that Gunship album too. Like, it's got this real anthemic quality that I just can't. It's very, very attractive, you know. And the other thing about it too, there's some of the lyrics on there I think are a little bit. This is another thing where again, lyrics come second for me, but there's some of the lyrics are a little corny, right? But I think the cool thing about it is that because they're referencing the '80s, and '80s music had a corny aspect to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's part of them staying in character. Like I can still justify it; doesn't bother me. Like
Right.
there's a song called "Nuclear Date Night." That sounds a little funny, right? But it's the '80s, right? It's like it's almost like a send up on the '80s. That completely like makes sense to me, and it adds to the identity of the group.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree.
Like something out of an 80s sort of sci-fi or like a sort of a parody. You'd see a sketch called SNL called Nuclear Date Night, you know.
Right.
Yes, but in the 80s.
Right.
Yeah. No, it comes across as very much of like a very cinematic, very sort of escapist in a way.
Yeah.
We want to go back and hear something from the past, but it's not actually from the past, but it could have been written and done for music of some kind of film or TV series or commercial or something or documentary in the 80s. You know, the list of guest appearances though is off the charts on this. Dave Lombardo, it's interesting. He was on another album this year, The Empire State Bastard. So that was was an extreme metal exactly with Mike Van Art and Simon Neil from Biffy Clyro. But it's interesting how you get different people and you get a whole like cornucopia of different guests involved just in this one album here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And I
like Will
love
Wheaton
that
was on
some
their
of those ones
previous
like
album.
you're talking about, Brent, are like, if you know people.
Yeah, exactly. Like Will Wheaton from the previous album, just because he's such a sci-fi nerd. And
right.
And the movies that are coming out with it as well with that sound, that Turbo Kid. Have you seen Turbo Kid? Yeah, it's got that whole synthwave, and the album is amazing. So it sounds beautiful. So, I don't. Yeah,
it's like 80s nostalgia. Have you heard of the band called the Night Flight Orchestra? And then during COVID, the guys from that band did a band called At the Movies, and they did covers of 80s songs that were in 80s movies.
Oh.
Kind of reminds me, even though their other primary band is like a death metal band or like melodic, I can't remember, but they did this Night Flight Orchestra stuff that sounds very 70s and 80s, and then they started doing this other stuff. So this reminds me a little bit of that, of a different style of music, mind you, but it's a kind of similar aesthetic. We love the 80s. We want to, just like Stranger Things, we want to capture Will Wheaton, Stand By Me, the 80s.
Yeah, Stranger Things is basically just an hour-long Radio Shack commercial each week, right?
Yep.
It's so true.
Love letters,
Yeah.
True.
Well, speaking of nostalgia, then let's talk about this next one, the Frank Sinatra Watertown album. Now, this is an interesting one that got edged out for me a little bit early on because of something else, but this is one of the ones I kind of regret getting lost because I go back. This is one that I listened to it more. It's opened itself up more to me. I've really come to appreciate Frank Sinatra's ability to emote, especially his later career stuff, because what he does with his voice is not florid. He's not doing a bunch of fancy stuff, but man, he's able to just really like capture his intent with his voice, right? And then this album is sort of a concept album, which is fun, like for Frank Sinatra with an early '70s concept album. Like there's so many things about it that kind of that make it unique and make it make sense. And I'm super glad that it actually made top 10 on this side, because I think it's a great album that I kind of ended up burying by accident somewhere along the line. But it's got some fantastic performances on it. And it's a couple songs on there that kind of make me choke up a little bit because it's Frank, because he can do that.
Yeah.
The documentary.
Being nostalgic, because to me that is pre my age. Even it was my parents that liked Frank Sinatra more, and I enjoyed hearing him again. It was good. I was glad you put that album on there. So that was.
I don't think of the 1970s when I think of Frank Sinatra, or at least in recording.
Timeless. I feel like it's a little bit timeless.
Yeah. And I mean, hadn't lost a beat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Watch
his final record, I guess, right?
I don't know if it was his final one, but it was definitely in the twilight of his career. And he was doing some stuff different on that album that he hadn't done before. It was the first album that he hadn't recorded live in the studio with the orchestra. Like the orchestra was recorded elsewhere in studio sessions, then he came in and tracked the vocals separately. That was the first time in his career that he'd ever done that.
Wow.
Yeah, he did.
Oh no, you're right. He did some stuff after that, but it's sort of like his last kind of big record.
Yeah, and if I was gonna say, if you watch that documentary, the amount of crap that poor guy went through, for his entire career was just, everything that he got accused of, and it was all public, it was all out there, and that really opened my eyes to him, because obviously at my age that he was already long gone. But I didn't really get exposed to his music until I got in the Navy band, and we're playing in big bands, and of course you're gonna play Frank Sinatra. So we played a lot of their music and a lot of his music. And that's when I really started listening to him a lot, but then kind of blew it off and then watched that documentary. If you got time, watch the documentary I think it's on Netflix. It's very eye-opening to what that poor guy went through. So.
Yeah, there were a few albums that you included throughout the year that were, how can you possibly vote against that person? For me, you did the Who, and you did Pink Floyd's More album. I mean, both of those were just painful to me, because how can you vote against our legends?
Right.
But Frank Sinatra's album really stood out to me. I don't know. I have a greatest hits album, so I don't know any of the, albums of his. I just know the famous songs. But I couldn't turn it off when it was on. I wanted to feel it the whole way through. And to me, that's especially in today's age where everybody's just playing one song they pick from Spotify. To me, that's a sign that it's really fantastic.
Right. Yes. Right. And Frank Sinatra was, the majority of his career was like pre-album age, if you know what I mean. Like things were released in collections, but it wasn't conceived of as an album, right? No. That's something that happened like starting in '68 going on. So for him to come in and make an album, a long form concept album, this is one of the things that attracted me to this album, because it seemed like it was a confluence of like, he's trying something different, but I think that he was pretty successful at it, and it's kind of cool to hear him try it, considering his background, his experience. And I thought it was an interesting meeting point between, a guy who's got so much life experience and so much professionalism and is such a defining voice, and trying to latch on to something new to try to, I hate to say make himself relevant. That sounds a little bit judgy, but to redefine himself in the '70s,
Yeah, and they talk about that in the documentary. They talk about what his feelings were on rock music and when it was starting to come up, and what he was seeing and how it made him feel. And they credited him with the creation of the concept album.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Yeah,
I did not know that.
Yeah,
that album. I think it's In the Wee Small Hours.
Yeah,
some people consider like the first concept album.
Yeah, yeah. They wanted all of them, him and his arranger orchestrator, wanted the albums to feel like they're all about the same thing. And so I don't know, that documentary is just amazing. It shows his last performance. It shows, everybody in the room is just kind of in tears because they know it's his last performance. And when the guy kicks the microphone cable out of the wall and he's still singing to the crowd. So yeah, it's amazing.
Wow.
This is a comment in the abstract, but just thinking about what we were talking about at the very beginning, and I meant to say this, I've become part of the let's just listen to the next thing that pops up in Spotify crowd, listen to one tune at a time. This project, this process we've been doing here has really returned me to exploring at the album level, which is something I'd gotten pretty far away from.
Good. Do you think, I hope this isn't too far off topic, but do you think that the popularity of vinyl has maybe brought kids to do the same thing, since vinyl has gotten so popular lately?
I think the popularity of vinyl is a reaction to the popularity of streaming. There's those of us, and probably that are like this, that like we like to own the thing.
Yeah.
I like to have the album. I like to smell it. I mean, I was a CD guy. For me, it's a CD. I got them right here, like Stones Throw Away. So I like to have them. I like to smell them. I like to read the lyrics, all that stuff. I like to have the object. And a lot of people, I think, like that. But with streaming, you don't have that, right? So, I do think then the people that are getting into vinyl probably are going to be more keyed into the idea of the album as a unit of listening, right? But I also think that that's kind of a niche, even though vinyl is more popular. I think I teach middle school, high school kids these days. They're not getting vinyl.
Yeah, yeah,
You know what I mean? So
yeah.
I still think it's kind of a niche
It's a
crowd.
bigger it's a bigger niche, but yeah, I think
It's
you're
a
right.
bigger niche than it used to be. That's fair to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
Can
I
you
mean, Record
imagine-
Store Day helped, I think, some, but and having all the special items for Record Store Day that become kind of corporatized a bit, but that's helped. But yeah, I think it's still a niche, unfortunately or fortunately.
I mean, can you just think back to our consumption of music and that there was a time when we would take a 45 single record or a cassette single even and have to go flip something or change it every 3 to 4 minutes.
Well,
This-
I was
Yeah.
actually in this conversation with a customer of mine because I was designing out his conference room, and he was talking about fidelity and how he wanted really good stuff and he wanted really great sound, that vinyl sounded amazing. And he was definitely younger than me. He's probably in his 30s. And I had to stop and I said, when we grew up, no one really ever talked about sound quality. Like when we were younger, I'm talking like 10, 11, when all you had was vinyl. It was more about when the new formats came along, it was about functionality and how you listen to it. Like I can fast forward, I can rewind. I didn't have to get up and turn this thing over, and then
I can listen to it in my car.
Yeah, I could listen to my car, right? It was about how you actually interacted with that media. And then the sound quality wars didn't really pop up until CDs came along. And I think that only popped up because they were trying to sell CDs and CD players, right? But to this day, I have to agree with Jeff. CDs are still my favorite. I still think they sound the best out of everything. I think they're also the easiest, the most functional to interact with. So,
Right.
You remember when CDs first came out and they had AAD, ADD, and DDD
Yep.
labels on the back to track digital through the process versus analog?
yeah.
Also, some early CDs had indexes inside of them, and after a while, that went away. But like my first copy of Rush's 2112, okay, you had the tracks are on the album, but the actual extended piece 2112 had indexes inside of it where you could go to the beginning of each movement if it was tracked properly. Now the index went away, but my CD still has that, and I wonder how many CDs when that function went away when they finally said, well, we're just not going to do that part anymore.
Yeah,
Right.
y'all are reminded me of when I was little and before we had CDs and lyrics. It was an uncommon thing that they would put the lyrics on the actual vinyl albums.
Right.
And I would write the lyrics, and all I could get was the last 3 words of every line. So I would just write those 3 words down, and then I'd go back and listen to it and get the next 3. And it was such a laborious project, but I was so happy to have them when I was done because you couldn't find it anywhere.
Yep.
And then the hidden bonus track. There's another artifact of that era.
Yes.
Yep.
One of the most interesting things I heard somebody say a while back was that the beginning of the end for the album was the track skip button on the CD player.
Yeah.
Because you're like, I don't like this one, click. I mean, there's a while there were had tapes where you could fast forward it and hold it half, and it would kind of tell when there was a space between the songs. It would stop for a while. They did that.
Yeah.
But when you could just say, I don't like the song, click, that changed the album right there.
Yep. Right.
It
You were
felt like
forced to hear
magic.
the albums on vinyl, but on CD or even on cassette, you were forced because you'd have to hit fast forward and then stop
And then
it.
you have to wait. Yeah.
Well, you might stop it too far, or you may not stop it far enough, and so you got to fast forward again. Yeah.
Yep.
I know.
Yep. Okay, sorry, we are way down the rabbit
No,
hole.
we're off topic. That's okay. Well, okay, so we're talking about Frank Sinatra previously, and the next one is Wise Blood, the And in Darkness Hearts Aglow album. This is another album that I actually think is pretty nostalgic. Her previous album, Titanic Rising, kind of resonated with me a little bit more than this one did, but it's still in that same vein. And I know, Kenny, you've been talking a lot about Karen Carpenter recently.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this Wise Blood is one of the ones that one of the references I get a lot when I listen to her is Karen Carpenter, to a degree. Also, I always kind of say it sounds like what would happen if Amy Mann and Burt Bacharach made an album.
Oh.
Kind of in there somewhere.
Yeah.
So
I go back over that one. So I have been listening to a lot of Karen Carpenter, a lot lately. So her voice is just, I don't know, just attracted me lately.
yeah, right on. Well, and then after that is the sort of the contentious album cover, Zimba, right? Which is another one. This is one that she's an interesting character from El Paso, right? And has done some other stuff outside of just being a musician. But that was an album that I enjoyed it because there wasn't a whole lot of flash and bang to it. I liked just the songwriting on it, and it felt very earnest and honest overall. Not too presumptuous, I guess. Anyway,
kind
and I
of the
thought the
same.
album cover was cool on that one.
Yeah, disagreed on the album cover, but I gritted my teeth, didn't look at the album cover, and voted for it because it is just so really good.
Yeah.
I thought the songwriting was great, and her voice is fantastic, and it was really fun.
Nice. Here's the one I know that we'll have some talk about, some discussion on. Is that's Ghost Meliora. Kenny, you want to start? I know you got something on this one.
Yeah. Ghost was one of those bands that I was sitting here working, doing my thing, and had the radio on or the Spotify on, doing its thing, and some song popped up, and I don't remember which one it was, but I kind of clued into it, and I was like, "Who is that?" And because it still has the '80s feel, right? He still has all the guitar stuff. Everything is really '80s based, and of course that was my genre, and so I started listening to it, and I really, really liked it a lot. Started getting more into it. Then my wife started listening to it, and she really, really liked it. And we've seen them a couple times in concert, and they are amazing live. But what really turned me on about him was who Tobias Forge is and what he's done. He's built a band the way a band should be built. And having your studio band, having your road band, and being in complete control of everything. Some people can hate it. I think it's brilliant. I think that what he's doing is awesome. Being able to have that band on the road to play what he's playing or what he wants them to play. If they don't like it, they can hit the road. Goes back in the studio, and then the studio guys can to write some more music. And then to top it all off, all of these albums, it's like watching a mini series. Every single album is just you're almost like binge watching a mini series. And if you follow all of his stuff on Vimeo, like all those funny funny videos that he puts out, how he makes fun of everything, it's just so you can almost see into his brain, and he's also this like unassuming, little guy in all the videos you see of him. I just think the guy's brilliant. Just the melodies are amazing. We could talk about the lyrics and the meaning and what they stand for, and I kind of set that aside. I don't really care. I'm just kind of just listening to everything that they're doing. So yeah, I love them. I think they're great.
Yeah. I mean, my thought on Ghost, I cannot mess with their songwriting.
Yes.
I mean, the songs are just brilliant, and they're brilliantly produced. They do what they set out to do, which is to make hard rock bangers.
Yeah.
That's it right there.
Mm-hmm.
And Ghost, of course, lost out with me only because I had to decide what kind of over the top I wanted to deal with. The showdown for them was Ghost and Crown Lance, right? So do I want to deal with over the top satanic imagery, or do I want to deal with over the top Rush comparisons?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. It's the Rush comparisons. I have less of a problem with that one, obviously. You know what I mean? But
I think
but
Ghost
I do
is kind of they're kind of like a brand, and Meliora I think might be their sort of their most renowned record, their kind of peak record. But yeah, I mean, they've become this sort of larger than life, almost cult band in a short window of time. And yeah, it's kind of like an Iron Maiden thing where they got this brand with their style. It's like you're not just seeing music, you're seeing sort of a kind of like new world, their own world, really.
Right.
Yeah, and he's creating that, and it's that this one guy has just really jumped in and created something out of nothing. It was just awesome. So it'll be interesting to see what their next album follows up, to see if they kill off Papa and bring a new one, and see how that goes. At their live concert, they do a backstage things where they put all the Papas in caskets, the ones that have died, and all of the different ones, and you can walk by and see them. It's kind of cheesy, but it's also kind of fun to see. And and so at the end of the last concert, they basically brought a coffin up, and Papa came out and he's playing a saxophone, and walked off. So I don't think they killed him off just yet. So we'll see how that works out for next year, or at least for the next album. Right. He had the Genesis song that they just redid. Jesus Knows Me. that video to me kind of turned me off to them. I was like, dude, that's going a little too far. And that's coming from a dirty old sailor. It's like, that's still kind of going a little too far. So I hope he doesn't push that button too much more and just kind of leaves that alone. But I do think the one brilliant thing about him is he can take a song like Thunderdome, and just the fact that he is singing it can make you look and listen to those lyrics from a completely different light. And that's very, very cool. And the same with the Genesis song. So
Yeah.
It's so tight. It's so crisp. I mean, if I just listen to the music, it's super solid. I almost hate to admit how much I like the sound because I really can't get behind a lot of the imagery.
Yeah. And they don't need it because they're so good. Like that gimmicky, they don't need, I wish they didn't have it because they're so good. And it really made me question my own preferences because you're introducing me to Riverside and to Ghost and all these ones that I was just like, this is the best album I've ever heard. Like, what, am I a heavy metal person? Like, when did that happen? You know, but it's not, it's got roots in different places. So
I mean, I guess it's the modern version of Kiss shock value from the 70s, right?
That's the other one. Yep.
Good point.
It reminded me that I really loved Heaven and Hell from Black Sabbath back in the day. And I had forgotten that I ever listened to that album. But when I started questioning, like, do I really like heavy metal a lot? That's the one I came back to. And I was like, yeah, I forgot how good this one is.
Listen to 13, the last one that Black Sabbath put out. That's my favorite albums ever. Wow. I love that album. So, and I was really a big Black Sabbath fan, even as a guitar player.
Oh, yeah.
Is just amazing.
Yeah. All right, so we're on the top 3 at this point. Slow Dive is number 3. And this is one, Mom, actually, you had a very interesting comparison on this one. She had listened to Slow Dive album and said it reminded her of the Moody Blues.
It did.
Which I thought was a really interesting comparison that I had not thought of, but that's a really interesting parallel that I hadn't considered.
The dream moment, the dreamy kind of moments I can see,
the dreamy orchestral bit.
Yep.
Well, Barbara mentioned Cocteau Twins earlier, and this is a band that actually made me not the vocals obviously, but the instrument work behind it. This really reminded me of Cocteau Twins.
Same era. I mean, pretty much. I mean, Cocteau Twins may come a little bit, but Slow Dive are one of those bands that you always hear about, sort of that foundation of that kind of dream pop from the
very lush
80s.
sound.
Yeah, and Cocteau Twins. Yeah.
That's what I put on when I'm having like a chaotic day. I want something that's just kind of, like you said, lush is such a good word. In the background, it just gives you that, I don't know, nice feeling.
That atmosphere that you're looking for to sort of
it kind of has the same functionality that the Kerrangman album has to a degree. You know what I mean? It can still kind of hang in the background and function in that way where it can be ambient, not ambient music, but it can function that way. Right. But I also think that it has a lot of depth in the songwriting, and especially the way that the layers in that album are set up. Like, I challenged myself at one point. I'm gonna listen to this guitar sound and see where it goes. So I keyed on a guitar and followed it, and it just kind of melted into other sounds, and then would kind of refocus it. It was really like the way that they put the timbres of the album together and mashed them up in the way that they did. Is really, upon scrutiny, very fascinating, but not obvious, which is, I think, the cool thing about it.
Yeah. It's fun that you want to listen to it more and get more into the layers of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, number 2, and no, Kyle, you'll like this one. Number 2 was Nordic Giants, Build Seas, Dismantle Suns. Now, this is an album for me. I got this album probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And I got it at the same time I got the Anathema album. Anathema's, what was it?
The Optimist, or was it one before it from 2014?
It was Distant Satellites.
That's it.
That's the one. And so those two albums,
they came out the same year.
That was what it was. And so those two albums were very kind of competed for the same space in my listening at the time.
Yep.
Yeah. And so I kind of gravitated towards the Anathema album, and this one kind of got put on the shelf. And at the beginning of this year, I was like, you know what? I've never really pulled that one back out. And boy, that one really gained a lot of momentum for me throughout the year. And it's pretty cool, actually, that it's ended up where it has with you guys. Because this is one that kind of came out and came back in. I think we had it at the beginning of the year. It got eliminated in January, but came back in the summer, and then has really played a big role throughout this throughout the fall.
I've never gotten tired. I mean, I don't listen to it that regularly, but I will contend that I've listened to all their records. They've got like 2 or 3 others. It's actually just 2 EPs, but
Right.
I kind of see it together because they released them together. They released the EPs, I guess, before that. It to me actually is like the best, you want to call it quote unquote post rock release I've probably heard in the last decade. And it just uses what I love with when post rock uses different instrumentation and takes like field recordings and samples, and it doesn't kind of meander. It just, the flow is so perfectly put together. In some ways, almost you feel like you want more. And I was blown away. But I remember posting something toward K-Scope on Twitter, like, "Where did you find this band? This band is amazing." Yeah, I love that Dismantle Sons and whatever the other part is called.
And if you see live footage of them too, this is another thing I think that's kind of missed on the album, because they have this really interesting stage presence. If you guys saw any of that stuff, where they're like these really elaborate costumes and screens behind them. They're a very cinematic band, and they really play into that, I think, in a live setting.
That's awesome.
Different vocal styles, different instrumentation. I mean, they're really creative. Sadly I don't like anything as much as that, since I like the other records, but I don't find them to be as good. But it's a great record. I don't know. Other people felt the same way. Maybe some of the people that weren't even able to make the chat tonight or whatever, but
yeah.
I love that they have a trumpet player.
Yeah. But the other thing is they're from different parts of they're not just all from the UK. I think there's some members maybe from some part of Africa, or I forget. They have other nationalities, so it's sort of a collaborative effort. And then I think that comes across in a lot of their music, but it doesn't sound like inherently British. But I know they're based there. So even with a name like Nordic Giants, they probably have their connections to wherever, somewhere in Scandinavia.
All right, let's get to the heavyweight.
All right, let's do it. The number one album, and actually this is one that everybody kind of agreed on this year, I think, was this Steven Wilson album, The Harmony Codex. Yeah.
Yep.
Now, this is another one, as I think somebody was talking earlier about how, well, I've been listening to this guy for forever, and now suddenly everybody seems to be talking about him. Like, Steven Wilson, I started listening to like year 2000, 1999, when I very first discovered him with Porcupine Tree. And so I followed him for a long time. And I'll tell you, this album I think he's been searching for something in his own recordings for a while now. Because he's a kind of guy, he's a kind of musician that, given the opportunity to say, I'm going to make an album that's my dedication to Pink Floyd. It's going to sound exactly like Pink Floyd. I'm going to play a guitar solo in the style of David Gilmour. It's going to sound exactly like David Gilmour, because he's that kind of musician. And you'll probably ask him, like, well, Steven, that sounds just like David Gilmour. He's like, no, Steven Wilson, David Gilmour would turn 20 dB off the treble in that guitar solo. I'm not doing that. It doesn't sound anything like him. And he's got that kind of ear, Yeah. The differences that he hears are probably different. But this is an album that really he's pushed himself, I think, to make an album that's relatively free of references, Yeah. And he's explicitly said that. Now, you can't get away from your own references. It's going to sound like Pink Floyd. He's got that in his back pocket. You know what I mean? But I think that he went into it like, I'm going to make an album that's really just me and myself toying around with like electronics and guitars and everything else, and not like try to make something that's pulled directly from my past. And I think he's pretty successful at that overall on that end.
I think there was an interview with him that he more or less said that.
Yeah, that's where I got the idea from. And
as he was thinking about his previous records, many of his previous records, that he was intentionally not trying to channel this period of time, like whatever it was, Hank Cannot Erase is trying to channel like the 80s pop, or To the Bone rather, 80s pop.
Right.
So he was trying to like not think of a certain period. And he said that what ended up happening is he ended up getting sort of a different variety of kinds of music on this album. That's why it's not really one style.
There's a,
Omni.
there's a genius behind it. There is a sincere genius behind some of these songs. I mean, the way that we've talked about, the way that he would juxtapose some kind of really, strong driving music and then have some just like really flowy, atmospheric lyrics on top of that, that you would never see anywhere else, and just to perfection, created it. I mean, I was blown away every time I heard it. There was nothing that compared to it, in my opinion, for this year. It was so good.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, and I'll say it again. I mean, the music is so darn good that it's easy to overlook the brilliance of the lyrics, and it took me a while even just to really pay attention to them. I mean, like what life brings. I mean, I wrote, it's haunting, thought-provoking, right? The oscillating sunset fades in the autumn past, knowing it won't last. Gone, but that's just too bad, because that's what life brings. I mean, dude.
Hmm.
That's
Poetry.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of wondered if he came out in the 80s, if he would have been like Peter Gabriel. It's like this guy that just creates really thought-provoking music, really out there. And so when I listen to him, I think about Peter Gabriel. I don't know why. I just do.
No, I think that's an absolutely
That's a good
fair comparison. I
Good
think.
comparison.
Me too.
Yeah.
For sure.
No. I don't. There's like that song "Economies of Scale." I can associate. There's a moment on that dreamy moment gets really melancholy. There's like, I don't know what part of it's like, I'll never get that out of my head. There's certain moments in a lot of his songs. It's not exclusive to this album, but this album included that, where they had these moments that it's like a freeze, and I think of that one moment, and I'll just be brought back to that point. Staircase is another one where, when I first heard that, I was just like, yep, this is the way I want to hear his music sounding, where the drums were really high, and just the way it kept on crescendoing. It was like ascending into like beyond earth or something. It's kind of metaphysical.
Yeah. What it reminded me of when you said that, and these have probably nothing to do with one another, but that in Rainbow's album.
Oh, from Radiohead.
Radiohead.
Yeah.
How every song kind of melted into the next, and there was just such a driving force behind it. I feel like this kind of had that same kind of flowy, just perfection to the way that it just one song went into another.
It flows very well, even though the songs are so different. It's hard to believe that the album flows so well beginning to end.
It is,
despite the songs like whatever, something Scarecrow, and the title track sounds like a Tangerine Dream piece, and it's like 9 minutes.
Oh, it does.
Yeah. And what was it? The time is running out. There's just it's like a complete different. All these songs are different types of songs, but he managed to do it.
It's really, and I think it's really interesting how he's able to have such a diversity of songs, but still get it to hang together based on his musical personality. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And if you look back in his history, like there's association with Stephen Wilson and Porcupine Tree that people have because of In Absentia kind of becoming the defining album by that group, right? But like he has his basis like in electronica and lots of other stuff, and it's really cool to see him really get those things to coalesce into something that's kind of unique at this point, And I think
it could have been like a self-titled album, actually, like Peter Gabriel, like you said.
Yeah.
You think about it, it's really like a melting pot of a lot of different styles of all his whole career in some ways.
I agree with that.
And you can't, like we talked about on some of the previous albums, is you can't dismiss the production, because I watched a video where he went in, I think he's the engineer. He records stuff. Yeah. And again, that's not easy. That's writing the music, to me, is the easy part. It's the production part that's actually hard. And you think it's easier today than it's ever been, but it's not. There's so many options. There's so many ways of doing it. It's really difficult. So for him to sit in the studio and do that by himself is just amazing. So,
well, he had the time during COVID, I would guess.
Yeah. Here's another crazy thing about it too, because he has not officially he's a person that plays live, right? He's a live musician. He likes to go out and play, but he's not made arrangements to play this album in a live setting. He's instead been setting up like these immersive Atmos experience performances, where he gets up there on stage and basically just pushes play on the album, but does it in this specially designed
listening parties. Yeah, those listening
surround listening parties. Because he's a big fan of surround Atmos. Like he records albums. He's been going back and recording like 70s albums in this surround environment. He's kind of like the go-to guy for that right now. And so people have been coming out of these performances, when I say performances, saying it was a transformational experience, like it's really intense.
I know. Yep.
Yeah.
You know?
I saw many accounts of that. Like, this was the most surreal thing I've ever experienced. I mean, they always talk about how that was greater than actually listening to the album. So I was like, am I missing something for not being able to go to one of these listening sessions? I don't know. I probably am, but
it'd be cool if he showed up at the Sphere in Las Vegas.
That comes to mind, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, that would be amazing for him to put that together. And just off topic, kind of on top of off topic, is I'm like I said before, I'm an AV designer, and we get a lot of people now that are calling and asking, how can I get Atmos sound in our room? So a lot of the gaming places,
Right.
these they're asking us, can we get these systems put in so we can actually test our games in Atmos? So I think we're going to see more of that. I really do.
we will for like the niche audience. I was just gonna say, Jeff, he does play live, but I know he's had some reservations about doing it. I mean, I think his home is really more, his niche is really as a recording artist in the studio and doing work in the studio. But you're right. I mean, I don't know if he's going to try touring for this thing. He wanted to tour for the Future Bice. He had some like big things set up, and of course, and then COVID happened, and so all those plans went by the wayside. But I don't know. I've always got the impression about him is he actually first is like a studio recording artist, and then second he has a tour. He will play live, but
But he usually tours for albums, and I think it's interesting
has,
that he's. I think it's interesting that he's sort of supplanting his touring schedule and instead focusing on the sonic potential that he's trying to pull out of this album, really presenting it in that way to the audience. I think that's really interesting, and again, kind of a brave step, for a guy who's out there like really trying to fight for keeping music as a live thing. He's a proponent of that.
And
we'll see if he tries to do some touring the next year or two for it. You'd think he may try to, but
yeah, I would like to see more venues that would take that on. We went to, I don't know how many concerts last year. We had so many concerts in the last 2 years. And this year we decided we're probably not going to go to too many more because we just kind of got over it, kind of boring, just it is what it is. If they would push more bands like that and you get more of the experience like that, I would probably attend more. I would go out to more shows. I think that'd be really interesting to see something different.
That would be it. If you could get a different live experience, be almost like you go to a laser light show, you're getting this other element to besides just hearing the music.
Yeah, there was a place here in Austin, Jeff. It was right across from Crockett High School. It was that coffee place. It was kind of right down the road from Crockett, and it was a listening place. It's not there anymore. And you had to be quiet when you went in. You weren't allowed to talk or anything like that. And they had surround set up, and the bands would play. And that was really, really interesting. But they closed down. They had a record shop on the outside of it as well. And I was kind of hoping that kind of thing would take off, but it didn't. So, but having I think having a venue with surround and having artists that would to develop albums that could be played in surround, having that new type of artist come up, that would be interesting to hear. And it would be cool if some of these kids had venues like that where they could write the music that was specifically designed for surround and then go in, give the files, and then have the show played. That would be, as you're doing your composition, you're thinking about pieces moving around the room, right? And then how they would actually interact. That's a whole different level. So I think that's something that needs to be explored.
Yeah, that's definitely cool. So that's it, man. That's the top 20. That's everything. So, I guess the big question, aside from my cat liking my space,
I got my cat crying right over here too. Yeah.
It's my hope that all you guys got exposed to some stuff that maybe you didn't before. At the very least, in the end, it's not about like the one criticism that I've had about the process that I've been trying to go through to come up with this top 20 is that it sort of reinforces this idea of, thumbs up versus thumbs down. Understand what I mean? Like, this is good, this is bad, binary. And it's really my intention to just get people to think about things more and great. Just because I like this a little bit better than the other one doesn't mean that the other one's terrible. You know,
No.
it's just like maybe I like one thing, maybe I like the album cover more. Who knows, right? But the real point is to get exposed to music along the way. And even if like your favorite album didn't make the top 20, the idea is to find new albums that you like, put on your list. You know, so I'm hoping that you guys got that at the very least.
Oh, definitely.
Definitely. A lot of names I don't know that I should be checking out.
100%.
That's that one, the 80s one that was very cinematic sounding. That I need to spend time with that. I was just gonna ask you, Jeff, have you ever heard of a website called Pub Meeple something? Because like on some of the, I like go through my list myself, and I struggle to like compare and rank things, especially songs. I just pull my hair out trying to compare songs. When I go to that site, it literally does comparisons, and then you do this like hundreds of comparisons depending on how many you're doing, and then it gives you a ranked list.
Interesting.
I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Pub Meeple. With the rest of it, and it's not just for songs. It could be for it ranks anything. Pubmeeple.com/ranking-engine. So I just what you describe in the whole process reminds me a lot of that.
Oh, yeah. But
is there a way to access the full list of 132?
Yeah, I put well, I have it all on the actual brackets in that Google sheet that I have put up in the group page. And I think I still have a link up to that. I've kept that up there in the group page. I tried to pin it to the top, but sometimes it'll get scooted over. So I can put that back up so you guys can see how everything panned out.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's a Google sheet that has 3 pages. So you see the spring eliminations, the fall eliminations, and the finals in it.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah, that'd be neat to look at.
Yeah.
So.
And you'll be amazed. You look at it and you're like, wow, that was a lot of music. That was a lot of music we got through. But it's great. And then, you know, in the end, here's the thing that's really funny to me is that I get to the end of the year and I make my top 20. And now I start thinking about all the stuff from the year that like, wow, that was a good one that didn't make the top 20. And now I'm like, you know, want to get back into those things that I need to go back and pay attention to. So it's great. And it's exciting.
How do you come up with the list? I'm curious. They're just, are some of them like holdovers that didn't make the top 20, or is there like
I try to start fresh every year.
Yeah.
You should see my Bandcamp list is silly. I've got like probably 250 albums on the list, and I probably have eliminated 100 in the last month. You know what I mean? And for me, it's like before I go to bed, I'll like listen to a couple tracks and like, okay, yes, okay, no. And that's been affecting my choices recently because it makes me not choose aggressive albums because I'm doing it right before bed. You know, because so the setting actually impacts the way that the things that I'm going to choose. So sometimes I have to like, before I eliminate this, you know, punk rock album, maybe I should, or this noise rock album, I'll listen to it somewhere else, you know, a couple tracks just to make sure it's not just because it's bothering me, you know. But then, so I vet things really super carefully as best I can, and I also try to map things out too long, because the other thing I can do is like, okay, I'm going to plan out my next 2 months worth of albums, and then when I get a month and a half down, I don't want to listen to that album anymore. You know what I mean? I've lost interest.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing that I'm
in the moment. Yeah. Anyway,
so
listen, I gotta get going.
I
gotta get going, but
sure.
This has been a lot of fun. Great to meet you guys, and
Great to meet you.
Maybe we'll do this again sometime. So
Yeah,
sounds
I'm gonna
great.
punch also.
You guys
I'll probably
take
do the
care.
same thing mid-year.
Yep. Oh, sure. All right. Cool.
Yeah. I gotta hop off too.
You guys have a good night.
All right.
Take
Guys,
care, everybody.
thanks so much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.